Hello everyone and welcome back to Whisky Wednesday. This week I'm going to mispronounce many Irish things, or Irish Gaelic things I should say, in the quest to talk to you about this whisky. Silkie. Specifically Silkie the Midnight. Now Silkie is from a distillery called, this is where the bad pronunciation starts. I think it's pronounced Sliabh or Sliabh Liag. It's just, if that will focus. That word there. Not the easiest thing for me to pronounce, I do apologise. There are a group of whiskies which are other Irish single malts put together in this distillery. I imagine they're aiming to produce their own at some point as well. And this one in particular is pretty unusual. It's a 46% non-chill filtered product. It is simply stated as an Irish whisky, despite the fact it contains numerous Irish whiskies which aren't produced at their distillery. Yet, anyway. From what I can gather, we don't know how many different single malts are within this from the Republic of Ireland, but we know there is 5 cask maturations on this. 3 of them are bourbon, sherry and red wine. And then this particular product is finished in virgin oak and imperial stout casks. 35% of this entire whisky is 55 ppm. And a Silkie, for those of you that may not know your Irish folklore, this distillery is based on the coastal part of Donegal, like facing the Atlantic. And a Silkie, it sounds pretty horrible and terrifying when you first describe it, but they are creatures who shed their seal-like skin at night in order to lure in the men from the sea. They're said to have beautifully long hair, fantastic eyes, and great voices. Unfortunately, I only have 2 of those things. I can't really get away with the hair anymore. But this was lent to me by a customer at the shop I work at, and a friend too. So thank you very much, Ian, for lending this to me, because I have never heard of them before. They are part of not as one company, but there are 3 distilleries in Donegal, 2 whiskey and 1 gin, who are trying to recreate Donegal's spirit industry, which is a wonderful thing to hear, because that's a part of the world where my family does hail from, as I'm sure perhaps a few of you are watching this as well. But here we go. It comes in this beautiful tall bottle, quite a tall thing. It reminds me of like Buffalo Trace Antique Collection bottles. It's got that vibe to it. And it does state non-chill filtered. It doesn't state anything about colour, but meh. Lots of history, lots of detail, 5 different cask types, 35% of the whisky is 55 ppm. Let's see what it does. Interesting. Now, there is no grain whisky in this, it is all single malts, but there is a whiff on it of something grain-like. Now, I don't know if that's because we've got both bourbon and virgin oak, and perhaps my nose is mistaking those scents for something which could be a bit grain-driven. Overall, though, very sweet, very welcoming. We've got some very classic kind of brown sugar. I get the stout thing. It's kind of different. Without using the word chocolate, I always find it very difficult to describe what stout smells like, because it looks dark, it smells dark, and it tastes dark. So I can never really figure out how to describe a stout. But there is certainly like a yeasty quality. But even that's quite sweet. It actually comes across a little bit almost like a champagne. Within those brown sugar and stout notes, there's also some really kind of clean, kind of classic Irish notes in there. I'm getting lemon, there's like a little bit of elderflower. It kind of reminds me of summertime, really. I'm not a big beer drinker in general. The only beers I do tend to drink are either Guinness, just because it's so widely available and most of the time tastes pretty good, and beers like Australia, which are a little bit and not Estrella, sorry, Sagres, which are like a little bit sweeter, your sort of Spanish beer style. But yeah, initially the nose has got these, you know, brown sugar, chocolatey. Nice and mellow, nice and sweet. Price on this bottle, by the way, forgot to mention that, £35. So a lot going on in terms of cask makeup, a lot going on in terms of the whiskies that are in it. Quite an interesting history, and not particularly expensive either. And now there's like toffee, caramel. It's just generically, not in a bad way, but just generically nice and sweet with some sort of soft, summery citrus notes, lemon, elderflower, that sort of thing. If I can nip my head out of this camera, it is wonderfully oily. The product is holding the glass very well. Great body to it. Let's taste it. Sometimes silence is a bad thing. Not necessarily in this case. That has got a lot going on. Like a lot. My brain needs to think a little bit about the things I'm tasting, right? What we were tasting on the first glass, but I'm going to talk about the finish first. And the texture of the product. That is a vastly rich texture. You spin it around your palate and it just keeps getting thicker and thicker and thicker. That's very interesting. The finish on it is all about stout. Stout and virgin oak, which is what this particular combination of their whiskies is finished in. There are those burnt barley. See, it's weird because there's not sweetness to it, but it's bourbony, stouty flavours, but without the sweetness. So there's quite a lot of dryness. Like I'd say medium to like heavy dryness towards the end of the finish. I keep having to like not soak, but like move my tongue around my mouth to kind of get some moisture back into different parts of it. Oh my God, what is that? It's like a grilled... I know what it is. So, if you've ever fried corn in a pan with like butter and spices, it's one of my favourite things to do to like make a corn salsa. There is an element in this whiskey of the sweetness of that corn influence, but it's also got the oaky dryness we've already talked about. But there's almost like this cayenne, fragrant, floral spiciness to it. Not like, kind of like chili pepper. And now I'm just getting like rich milk chocolate. That's just kind of come out of nowhere. This thing is like a chocolate bar, but it's got salt in it, it's got chili in it. It's a really nice balance of sweet leading into dry, oaky, savoury. Let's try that again. So even on the second sip, it does come across as quite youthful. You do have these sharp spikes of new mix spirit, a slight vegetalness, which is now coming into the finish on the second sip, wiping out a lot of those like more unusual chili pepper, cayenne notes. The first sip seemed really impressive. The second sip, not so much. Yeah. What is happening now? There's quite a lot going on with this. What's happening now is, if you've ever let a little bit of chocolate just sit on your tongue and allowed it to melt, that is the texture of this whiskey. That's been a positive point the whole way through it. On the second and third sips, a little bit more is becoming revealed of this youthfulness. It is an unage dated product, but outside of that, you know, I don't normally dislike those notes, but I think because there are so many casks fighting for dominance here, it's having a little bit of an adverse effect. The smokiness is actually very nice. It's very subtle. We've been told 55 ppm prior to being distilled. We've no idea what the residual ppm is. It's more something brands should just really do more, because it's significantly more accurate into what you're drinking rather than what happened before it was put into a cask. The smokiness is nice, but every time I kind of get another load of that smoke, it's being backed up again by this youthfulness, which is kind of starts to hammer through all of these really nice notes that are in there. I taste no red wine at all. But that could be, depending on the type of red wine cask it is, that could be assisting with the dryness. The sherry, I don't really taste either. I suppose if you taste, they've got 3 of the bottles in this range, so I suppose if you tasted those 3, you'd have a little bit more of an accurate idea of where their sherry cask sits within this. I've got positives, I've got negatives. The negatives are, I don't normally mind the youthfulness of the spirit coming through, but within this it seems to overshadow a lot of the nice tastes of it. But again, it's not really been open for that long, and it's not even my bottle, so I shouldn't really be too harsh. The positives of this, it's got an incredible texture to it for what does seem like a relatively young whiskey. The stout and the bourbon and the virgin oak influences are there, and they're wonderful. They're very, very, very positive. I'm not too sure about the red wine and the sherry. The smoke is there. It does linger. It provides this nice kind of slightly minerally dryness. But overall, on paper, loads of info, loads of facts, but it is still new, and there is still a little bit of a way to go in my mind. But I will be buying some of the other ones in the range just to see what this is like, or if they do like a virtual tasting or something like that. I'll certainly be taking part in that. But overall, like the blueprint, a little bit more is needed for me. So with that, I'm going to give it like a 6.5. It reminds me a little bit of that Bear Fight whiskey that I tried. This one's got a cooler story. The Bear Fight one didn't really, but good stuff for the future, for sure. Bar means I'm not trying to like dig these guys a hole or myself a hole, because there's so many fun distilleries in Ireland. This is one of them. That at the minute, you know, people are just trying to find their feet and figure out what they want to do. This is part of that project. But overall, I think like a 6.5. I wouldn't spend £35 on this if I got to try it. But it's a very interesting story and a very interesting cask marriage. But yeah, overall, I'm going to give that a 6.5 out of 10. So thank you all for watching. This is the Silkie Whiskey, the Midnight. Hopefully promising things for the future. And for the minute, has some very positive points to it. But thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.